Ann Powers is NPR's music correspondent and critic and writes for NPR news blog The Record. She has served as a critic with the New York Times, as well as the chief pop music critic at the Los Angeles Times and senior curator at Seattle's own Mopop. One of our great cultural treasures here in Seattle is the Mopop Criticism Festival. She is the author of Weird Like Us, My Bohemian America, which explores inherited counterculture and sustainable living in alternative America, and co-author and editor of singer-songwriter Tori Amos's autobiography, Piece by Piece. Joining her in discussion is Riz Rollins, aka DJ Riz, who has been broadcasting on 90.3 KEXP radio for over 25 years and is a Seattle institution unto himself. His weekly session at Rebar is the longest running club night in Seattle history. And his roots are as deep as Seattle's original music scene in the last 25 years. He has celebrated the anniversary of his interviews and sessions with Nirvana. He was the first DJ in America to put Smells Like Teen Spirit on the air. And he continues to expand our mind with his show Expansions on KEXP to this day. So please join us in giving a warm town hall welcome to Ann Powers and Riz Rollins.
I don't know what that means. I don't put out for free. Hi, everybody. Y'all know, really, that's weak. I know you hear me. So.
Do you like my Stevie Nicks sweater? I got it at the Goodwill. I got it at the Goodwill on Gallatin in Nashville, Tennessee.
Awesome. It's awesome.
Thank you.
We're supposed to use microphones.
We are.
Yeah.
I can do the mic.
Hello. Did I sit on the mic? No, baby.
That comes later.
No, baby. I
That's
did not
just,
sit
that,
on the mic.
That's chapter 5. No.
You know, speaking of sitting on the mic, one of the things I was thinking of when I was reading your book was, and it's not in there, but Tina Turner from what's the movie? Gimme Shelter.
Oh, yes.
Anybody?
Yes.
Have you all seen that? Tina Turner. Have you seen what Tina Turner does with a microphone? Serious. A lot of people think that Tina Turner comes from that. What's love got to do with it? Watch Gimme Shelter and take a shower. Serious. It will make you very, very warm.
Mick Jagger didn't take a shower for like 20 years after seeing that movie. He based his whole thing on that. Hey, can I ask a question? This light is like totally blinding me. Do we need to have that on? I'm being a diva, but it's like truly in my eyes exactly. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyway, mood lighting's better for a woman of my age.
Me too.
But you know, Tina Turner, she's one that I wish I'd written a lot more about in this book. And I definitely, in the revision stage, I was like, man, I got to get Tina in there, at least a few mentions, because she is fundamental, and she really, like, male rock style of the 60s is so Tina. It's, you know, she inspired so many rockers at the time.
Her sexuality surprised me. The first time I ever saw sexuality on the stage was in I'm going to say 69.
There was a lot of sexuality on the stage in 1969.
But it came from Howlin' Wolf. I went to see Howlin' Wolf, and he did more obscene things with the microphone than Tina Turner ever tried. And he crawled around on stage, and he howled. And it was really kind of, I was, 16 maybe? It was really frightening. But in that delicious 16-year-old frightening way, you know, where you be like...
He's funny feelings.
Those funny feelings. When you talk... Most of you all haven't read the book. So we'll start kind of at the beginning and go through. Is that all right?
Yeah.
You start talking about those funny feelings
I do.
when you were
9 years old. Well, for me, it was and my brothers are here, so he can verify everything. Although I don't know if he remembered when I was 9, but you know, with me, it was more. It wasn't obviously at that age going to see live music, but it was recordings and visuals, and you know, I fell in love with the photograph of Paul McCartney and those big chocolate brown eyes, and I had such a huge crush on Paul McCartney, and I think kind of entered the realm of fantasy, and like so many young girls before me and boys, you know, that shaped my reception of the music from the beginning. But I will tell you, I do want to tell a story about, I think the first time I realized watching live music how sexuality worked, and it's very different than yours. So
You better believe it.
So Our Lady of Fatima Church, I know we got some Fatima people in the house. I don't know, I'm not going to name names. Those who remember can identify. There was like a school dance, and a band was playing. I was a freshman in high school, and there was a boy in this band who was a senior in high school, and he liked my friend who was a freshman, and they performed. These are all a bunch of kids from Magnolia. They performed Let Me Stand Next to Your Fire, and there's my friend, who's, you know, young freshman, 14 or whatever. Here's this boy singing Let Me Stand Next to Your Fire to her, and we were just like, oh my God! You know, it seemed like the sexiest thing in the world. And they ended up going out, and they went out for like 4 years. Power of Jimi Hendrix.
I'm still stuck with my favorite Beatle.
Who's your favorite Beatle, Riz?
The one I had a crush on?
Yeah.
Can you guess?
George.
No.
Ringo
Starr. Oh my God. Ringo Starr was like, are you kidding me? Why is nobody paying attention to him? Because he's easily the finest one up there.
What is it about Ringo? Is it the
his
the
eyes.
Roman nose? Oh, the
eyes. It was the kind of. I'm from Chicago, and so when the Beatles hit, I was in the crossroads with racial identity in Chicago. The Beatles were one of the first groups we were allowed to like. My first crush was Elvis Presley, of course, but the first person we were allowed to bring records in. My mother wouldn't let any Elvis in the house because niggas couldn't do nothing for Elvis except shine his shoes. That was the going thing. Anybody ever hear that story about Elvis? I understand that story has been refuted, but among the divide, the cultural divide was so strong that you had what you listened to determine your allegiances. Yes. And even at the age of 7 and 8 and 9, I did not want to not be a part of my people. Right. So I had that secret thing for Elvis, but I saw all the movies and the whole bit. Yeah. But the records I could bring in the house, the first crossover record I could bring in the house was Hard Day's. No, not Hard Day's Night. It was the first Beatle album.
Now, was that okay because they were British? Is that why you thought your mom?
No,
your mom
it was okay because they were innocuous. Yeah. Because she loves you, yeah. You know.
Yeah.
How bad can a white boy be if that's all he gonna say?
Although, you know, it's funny because I get that the Beatles were innocuous, or they're like children's music in a sense. The Beatles have become children's music, and that's one thing I think. That's one reason they endure is because we always pass them on to our children.
Right.
But Please Please Me, gotta ask some questions about that song, because not is it racy, it's a bit coercive and disturbing, really. You know.
Did you hear it that way?
I didn't when I was a kid, but I kind of hear that now. Maybe am I being too politically correct?
No, I mean because you really want somebody to please you. Yes. I mean that's not politics, I don't think, or it shouldn't be if it is. But no, I didn't.
Well, there's another way to view it. You know, you could view it as like last night I said these words to my girl. You know, like I'm kind of like also with Elvis. some of his songs, you know, it feels a little forced, even though he's singing them in a romantic way. It feels like he's demanding, what's that song, Don't, you know, baby, don't say don't. It's like getting into dangerous territory. But there's another way to think about Please Please Me, I guess, which is please please me as I pleased you.
Yes.
And
Right.
so maybe it's
Right.
like the boy is satisfying the girl, but the girl doesn't want to go all the way, which I think is a very kind of 50s, 60s teen
Right.
backseat of the car scenario. So maybe that is what's really going
So
on.
you were in touch with your eroticism like zoom.
Well, I guess. I'm Catholic, so
Oh.
I was.
Oh. And I'm Baptist. We have a whole other way of getting her done.
But you see, Little Richard, though,
Okay. Because the thing, having read the book, and I don't want to be critical, but from my point of view, the elephant in the room was Little Richard as drag. And you don't talk about it that much. There's a lot you don't get to. This is a really thick book, by the way, and it's filled with footnotes, which I didn't expect. I thought I was going, good booty. I'm looking for pictures. The first thing I'm.
that's the next volume.
And so, I hope there is a next volume. It was rich enough on all sorts of levels. I think there's a lot more to be said, but Little Richard, you talk about how his subversion, as it were, but the gay part of that subversion, which I think, how could you not know that Little Richard is a flaming queen? And yet, I saw him once on Arsenio Hall show, one of the saddest things I ever saw. They were back and forth, and Arsenio said, "So, are you dating anyone?" And he said, "Well, are you dating anyone?" He said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Is it male or female?" Arsenio did that. And Little Richard said, "Why would you ask me that kind of question?" And I'm like, "Whoa, what do you mean?"
Which direction?
Yeah, yeah.
Which direction?
Yeah.
Why? Like,
And he said, "Well, you've been out with men," and Little Richard looked like he was being outed.
wow, really?
Yeah. And Arsenio pressed on. He said, "In your book, you say,"
Oh, yes, he does.
you say that you used to think of men when you slept with women. And Little Richard said, "I said that?" And Arsenio said, it was going downhill fast. And Arsenio said, "Yeah, it's in the book." And then he said, "Well, if it's in the book, it's in there." And then he said, I remember this very well, obviously. Then he said, "Well, if you'd seen the women I slept with, you would know that I had to think of something." And I said, "What? What?" Arsenio didn't let it go. He says, "So, what's her name?"
Ooh,
Right?
that's cold.
And then somebody in the audience yells out, "James Brown." And Little Richard becomes unglued, completely unglued. "Don't say that about James. Don't say that about James." And then he said, "Look, I'm a preacher. I probably used to do that, but I don't do that now. God didn't make Adam and Eve, Adam and Steve, Adam." He did the whole thing. And I'm thinking, and his pancake makeup is like all over everywhere. And I'm thinking, dude, you can't be the last to know. But at the same time, he has never been out.
Well, that's one thing I know in the book that in hard rock, there still has never been an out gay man from the beginning of his career to hit the mainstream. Now we have Adam Lambert, who came out gradually, and Rob Halford, but it's still, 2017 is still.
But you do a bit on Sylvester.
My deity, Sylvester. I was just in San Francisco, and I, on Castro Street. Does everybody know Sylvester? Oh my goodness, Sylvester is the greatest, and to me, one of the most unsung stars of our time. And on Castro Street, there are a few like plaques, in the ground they put in. One is Gertrude Stein, and then one is Sylvester. They're right by each other. I was just thinking about Sylvester. Absolutely. But one thing about Little Richard that's interesting, not to spend this entire time talking about the private life of Little Richard, but he does, if you read The Quasar of Love, his biography, he talks about he is a voyeur. Now, the question is, was that a mask? Like he openly talks, he's like, I liked to watch other people, men and women together, and he had this companion, Lee Angel, who was a young woman that he met when she was in high school, as many of those 50s rockers were into. And he claimed that he liked to observe her and others. But I feel like that might have been also a mask. I don't know. A way of...
Which to me means, I think it lends weight to how influential he was. Yeah. Because if this person could do drag and get away with it, and nobody know who he is, well, then everybody can do drag, which is a whole glam thing, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And, Little Richard inspired David Bowie. David Bowie famously used to carry around a photograph of Little Richard standing in a red suit next to a red Cadillac. And that was like his inspiration.
You have an anecdote about David Bowie and Sylvester.
Yes. Oh, that's a great one. So, but when Sylvester was the queen of San Francisco, and the great star of the Coquettes, which is the fabulous performance troupe that was founded in the late '60s, and he was part of that. Bowie came, actually, I guess it was a little later, 72. Bowie came to Winterland in San Francisco, didn't sell it out, and he said, well, of course, they don't need me. They have Sylvester. And Sylvester opened for Bowie, and as Joshua Gamson, his biographer, says, apparently was hoisted aloft and flew across the stage. Sylvester. 1972. Take that, Britney Spears. She flew in like 2001, I remember.
The Britney Spears chapter, but I think I'm getting ahead of myself. But maybe I won't. I'll do it now since it's up. Because you write about, that's in the chapter about cyborgs, which I found annoying in the beginning, and you won me over. So the chapter, as I understand it, is how the zeitgeist accepts eroticism, particularly with women. And so whereas women have been fetishized, particularly in pop stars, the emphasis moved away from the voice to this other matrix voice, I think is what you say. Yeah. And Britney was the harbinger of that.
Well, I'm very obsessed with The Matrix. I'm very obsessed with Blade Runner also. Oh. And I'm fascinated with the idea of the replicant, And, I mean, Britney Spears is obviously not, I don't think she's a replicant. But, we've seen a very human side of Britney Spears, but I think the way in her music, her voice works, it was the perfect foil to synthesizers, to that highly processed sound that Max Martin was so good at, and which has then gone on to producer Max Martin, define so much of 21st century pop, because he is so influential, and that Scandinavian style of production, which is clean and mechanical and compressed, and her voice just fits perfectly in there. And it's cyborgian. And what I talk about is how Britney Spears was the first superstar held aloft by digital natives. Her fans they grew up with the internet. And she was marketed, one of the very first pop stars to be marketed via the internet. There's a great, I think it's a Rolling Stone feature where a writer went to O-Town, which was the complex that, what's that guy who went to jail who was there? Somebody help me out. Lou Pearlman? Yeah. His complex in Florida. And they're talking about Britney's around and all the members of Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and Justin Timberlake is sitting there doing an online chat with fans. Mm-hmm. And this is so long ago, right? So kids who came up as digital natives, have a different relationship to their identities than any of us do. And, they are augmented from the minute they start to come into consciousness. And they're not just their sexuality, but their whole selves. They can play with identities in ways that we couldn't when we were young. They can change identities. They can connect to people virtually. And I think that's really the fundamental change of our time. Maybe that's an obvious thing to say.
No. You completely demystified Britney Spears in a chapter. My experience with Britney is that I hated her. Hate. Don't get it. And I used to DJ at a club up the street, our place. And gay men were always asking me to play Britney. And I couldn't figure out why Britney. Madonna, I get. Right. But Britney didn't make any sense to me. And I also felt like Britney ain't doing nothing for us. Right? So why are we so attached as gay men? I'm not. Why are we so attached to Britney Spears? And I think there were only two songs that I really liked about her. Slave for You, which I have a difficult time with. I have anything that
word. I mean, come
absolutely,
on. Yeah, it's
absolutely,
like, why,
right. So I'm not finding many brothers that are listening. No. I'm a slave for you. I don't want any slaves. I don't want to be bothered with that. Absolutely. But the toxic,
yes,
because it's so Bali.
Yeah.
It's like, who thought to take Bali music and match it up with her? Yeah. And I got to the point that if I played any Britney, I would only play the instrumental version of Toxic. And then play that music behind it. But then when you go into this chapter about the cyborg and the replicant, you open up to me, you demystified how it is that artists now who can't sing, that's okay.
Right. Well, if you're skillful, if you are skillfully interacting with machines, with synthesizers, T-Pain is the other great example. Now, T-Pain famously recently did a Tiny Desk concert for NPR Music and blew everybody away because he could actually sing. He has that kind of gospelized vocal style. But I think his genius was really the way he used auto-tune, almost like, and he talks about how he was inspired by Roger Troutman and people in the 80s who were using the vocoder in a way that we now kind of think sounds, primitive or like very, early technology and kind of clunky. And that's what I like about T-Pain, though. It's like his humanity is constantly leaking through in these very synthesized songs. And then the songs are all about his longing. It's unfulfilled longing, especially for strippers. And, which I think is relevant because another thing that happens in the age of, in this age, 21st century, is that sex as a transaction becomes more foregrounded. And maybe that's partly because of the rise of internet pornography and the rise of awareness about pornography.
I blame Madonna.
Oh, now.
I do. I blame Madonna, and this is my opinion, and you didn't ask for it. I'm giving you anyway. Madonna can't sing, in as much as she has.
Riz, what is singing anyway?
Well, and I'm a Baptist, so if you can't sing as a Baptist, then you serve on the deacon board or something. You don't get up in front of people and I'm gonna sing a song.
You play the Hammond B3, maybe.
You can play the Hammond. You can play anything. You can be, you can make dinners in the basement, but you will not get up and sing. And so I come from the tradition. I'm from Chicago. We're going to talk about that in just a second, where gospel music was the thing you had to do in order to be a singer. Yeah. And then sometime in the 70s, I'm going to say the 80s, because I rediscovered something reading your book. I kept trying to think, how many soul singers came from the church and you did a bit on the Soul Stirrers.
Yeah.
Sam Cooke's group.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten Lou Rawls sang with the Soul
Yes,
Stirrers.
he did. Yes, he
and
did.
Johnny Taylor,
Yes.
who did Cheaper to Keeper,
Wright.
and did O.V. Wright, sang with the Soul Stirrers. Yeah. So it didn't matter it kind of mattered how you ended up where you ended up. But you had to go through gospel singing, and you had to be able to do the things to church people that you were going to be required to do of unchurched people.
Yeah. But, I'm interrupting you.
No.
Do you want to finish?
We're talking.
All right. But, before Madonna flipped the switch on that, who did in the 60s? Diana Ross.
Diana Ross could not sing.
She could not sing in that gospelized way.
No, she couldn't.
But she could say, baby, 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 in a way nobody else could.
First time I ever saw them on the Ed Sullivan Show with my mom. And my mom was like, what the hell is that? No, seriously, what the hell is that? The makeup, the eyes, the arm movements, and the fact that she overshadowed, because the other Supremes, the only way you could overshadow other singers was to sing better than them.
Yeah.
And she didn't obviously sing better than anybody.
But the intimacy of her vocals. See, I think that's the thing. In a way, there are these figures throughout history, women singers who bring a new intimacy to their approach, and that it represents a kind of a modernity, Mm-hmm. So I write about this artist. I'm obsessed with this artist, Florence Mills. No one's ever heard Florence Mills. She was a star in the 1920s, but she never recorded anything. And we don't know what she sounded like. But descriptions of her by people like James Weldon Johnson, who were writing about the theater at that time, talk about her as if she were a bird, or if she were, not an angel, but like this ethereal being. But also she related to the audience in a different way. And I feel like Diana had that. Like, not talking about her personality
Sure.
or the gossip, but just like you felt like she was whispering in your ear with those songs. And I feel like that connected to a kind of modern woman of that time, and how teenage girls were kind of trying to develop their sophistication, and she embodied that. You don't buy it.
You've blown my mind reading this book a couple of times. Your emphasis to me on the voice being almost entirely female, particularly at the beginning of music history, when you're talking in post-slavery New Orleans and stuff, that whatever men did with singing, women had all the power, and particularly they had all the erotic power. And then I got to thinking, that probably lasted, and I think you make this point, until gospel. And that gospel allowed men to tap into the feminine power vocally and run with it. And when I was reading that, I thought, but they were all sissies.
Have you read Anthony Halbert?
I didn't even know it existed until I saw that. And I thought, because I've always wanted to do, in my little dream academia, whatever, I've always wanted to do the history, particularly in Chicago gospel, of black gays and black church, because in a different way with Catholicism, of course, but in the black church, when I was growing up, that's where gay men were.
Oh yeah.
It just completely and totally.
Etta James talks about that in her. It's like first couple pages of Rage to Live, her autobiography, and how she calls them the angels, and that same in L.A. It was the same thing exactly.
So I'm going to confess that one of my earliest sexual experiences was with a man in the church, and it wasn't the best.
Actually, in the church?
No, I was at his house.
Oh.
Ew. But you know what? One of the things that I will never forget, he started it. He asked me, is this okay? I'm telling you, okay. He asked me or propositioned me by asking me to teach him how to dance.
Wow.
And I thought, this is one of them brothers that go to church, don't listen to music, don't know nothing about it, don't know how to dance. and I'm 14, and he's probably 30. And he played, at the time, my favorite song, which was Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell, Your Precious Love. So here we are, dancing to Your Precious Love, and then it turned.
Oh, my gosh.
And I thought,
Whoa.
I've been trying to revisit that.
Wow.
You know, for me, that's where the conflict between the erotic and the music and the gospel and my own examined. I mean, 14. How much examining you going to do when you're 14? Where they all kind of clashed. Yeah. And the ground, I think, at that point was set for me to get to the best part of my life.
Wow. Well, that's interesting to me because, you know, one thing I think people expect sometimes from this book is it's all going to be positive, you know, celebration of sexuality and pleasure. And, of course, there's a lot of that. But I also try to talk about violation and you know, how even the beauty and joy of music was always preserved through moments of great oppression. I mean, this is the story of African diaspora. It's like music is a thing that allows for the survival of the spirit, against horrible dehumanizing acts. You know, but so that's one story where the joy and the pleasure is always intertwined with violence, violation, racism, sexism, all those things, and then the side of your story, though, that what reminds me is that figure of the young teenager and the complex thing of like recognizing the sexuality of very young teenagers, which did lead to exploitation often in rock and roll.
Still does.
Yeah, it still does,
Sure.
absolutely. But, you know, when Chuck Berry died, I wrote a piece called Bittersweet Little Rock and Roller for NPR that was talking about this, how on the one hand we can't deny that Chuck Berry, did things that were disturbing and often was interested in very young girls. But on the other hand, he also in his music celebrated the power of young girls and the way in which they were driving the culture. So this is the double-edged sword of rock and roll, is that recognizing that power, but then not, you know, always respecting the human being.
So do you think that's how R. Kelly gets away with it?
Mm-hmm. It's one way, for sure. I
mean, he's getting away with it as far as I'm
at this
concerned.
point.
And it, you know,
Yeah.
very publicly getting
Yeah.
away with it.
Yeah.
And
Well, I have a section in the book in it, like, you know, just talking about how in the 50s so many of these guys had extremely young companions. I mean, Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, who am I forgetting? Little Richard with Lee Angel, you know, over and over again. And I talk about how, like, we see this pattern all the way up to today in R. Kelly. And, yeah, I think with R. Kelly, there's a way in which have you ever seen him live?
no, never.
I've seen him a couple times. And,
You get around, Ann. You really do.
well, for my work, I went to see R. Kelly. And what's interesting about his performance is that there's a lot of comedy in his performance, kind of blowfly style comedy.
Right.
And a lot, so it feels very fantastic, and I don't mean like fantastic, wonderful. I mean like a fantasy, and it diffuses the predatory aspect, you know, and
often to the victim.
Yes,
Yeah,
no,
often
that
to the
too. I
victim.
think, yeah.
I know for me, I didn't know really what was happening until he told me, don't ever tell anybody because it would ruin my life. And I thought, well, I don't want to do that. I mean,
Well, there's
I don't want to do this, but I don't want to do that either.
Well, see,
so.
I mean, obviously, there's no justification that, you know, but I'm curious. Like you said, that experience affected your relationship with music.
it affected my relationship with everything. When you hear people talk about adolescent molestation, I don't want to give it that flavor because I was Moonlight, I think, really kind of the first time I thought, somebody gets this, you know, that whatever's happening to me over here is messing up what's going to happen to me over here. And how do I pull that together, and who do I talk to? And you don't talk to anyone. But for me, and I think we talked about this back there, in Moonlight, the music takes you through it. You know, the music actually does the speaking where the characters can't.
Right.
You know,
right.
they don't have the language.
Which is a central point of what I'm talking about in this book, is that music so often, either in our personal lives or in the culture, expresses what we otherwise don't allow ourselves to talk about, don't you know, either can't face or for whatever reason have decided is off limits. And music, and that always has, you know, whether it's, you know, the double entendres of the classic blues.
Right.
Or
Sister Girl goes to slavery first. She starts out at the very basics and then explores that exposition.
And in New Orleans, because you know, I feel that New Orleans is the seedbed of our culture, and the real, true capital, the African diaspora capital of America, and that America is an African diaspora country. I believe that. That is the soul of our country, and New Orleans is the place. And also, though, mixing. See, and I'd love to talk to you about this. So,
she talks about that in the beginning, too.
Yeah.
I'm just letting y'all know I read the book.
Well, it's hard to talk about these things, you know, and obviously as a white woman,
Wait. Really? Are they difficult? Because I get the sense of a kind of deliciousness from you, that you're enjoying all of this. Well, you're enjoying, like, telling all of these stories.
Well, I love the stories, and I hope I'm telling the truth, you know. So I feel confident in the stories I tell, but I don't. Anyone speaking about history that's lost to us, in terms of there's no recordings of the voices of that time. In fact, there's no record, for example, of the enslaved people who danced in Congo Square. There's no record of their own voices. They never were, you know, no one wrote down their words. The only words we have of that time, and you know, are from white observers. And that's why I talk about the white observer as also a key figure in the history of popular culture and popular music, always translating and mistranslating.
Well, but I also get the sense that the white observer is giving you the official white observer part of it.
That's right.
And I can't actually quote how you do this in the book, but I got the feeling that the white observer was dipping into the pool all the time.
Oh yeah.
You know, that it's not academic for the white observer.
No.
They're telling you what they can allow themselves to tell you, but they're not telling you what they've actually experienced with it. And that's the stories that we're going to have to make up.
No, you're totally right, I think. And you know, in many different ways. For example, I talk about Creole songs of the 19th century, these songs of domestic life in the South that often were from the viewpoint of enslaved women, about their relationships with men, about their relationships with their mistresses, their masters. And, you know, we don't really even know who authored these songs, in a sense. Like, they're oftentimes, like, a white man would put his name on that, but, you know, it's like, that's not like that hasn't happened a few times. But
it's still happening.
But, you know, these are traces of real stories that, and I don't know if there's any Rhiannon Giddens fans out there, but she's like my hero, and she is my hero. And she made an amazing record this year called Freedom Highway. And on that record, she talks about the history. Well, her songs tell the history of similar to what I'm talking about in the book in a way. And she revives the voices that have been lost. And she has this song on that record called Julie. And it is a white plantation mistress talking to her companion, slave, and, you know, saying, please stay with me. The Union soldiers are coming. Please stay with me. And Julie kind of plays her, and then in the last verse, she's like, you sold my children. This is hell for me. And it's just incredible. It's like the return of the repressed. And, you know, those stories, those are the stories we have to confront now. And I'm so glad some people are putting them out there.
I think this calls for a little bit of tequila.
Getting kind of heavy. I know I'm all like, yeah, woohoo.
This is where we take a drink.
To Rhiannon Giddens. Woo.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I just have to say, you said mazel tov, so I have to say, funny story. Remember that horrible, not horrible, that Black Eyed Peas song, I Got a Feeling, you know?
It's horrible.
Well, it may be horrible, but in my family, you know, we have an interfaith family. My husband is Jewish, and my daughter loves that song because of when will.i.am goes, raise up your cup, mazel tov. So here's to that moment.
You
see, mixing, amalgamation, it all comes together.
Did you make your point about mixing? Because I think we were going down that.
Well,
that
you know,
road.
I have a question. Like, let's talk about it because it is. One habit of thinking and talking about music that I'm trying to shift with this book is a bad habit you find throughout a lot of music writing, which is this way of talking about African American influence on rock and roll and stuff as, well, that's why those performers get in touch with our raw selves and our, you know, our primitive urges. I think that's racist, you know.
You lost me. Who's getting in touch with our raw selves?
No, but that's what I'm saying. I feel like a lot of music writing has sort of said that we always have to get back to that raw place, and that's in the blues or whatever. And to me, that's racist language. And so I try to stress, but see, it's hard to talk about mixing. It's just hard to talk about it without.
See, I'm not thinking mixing. I'm thinking thieving.
Yeah, that's right.
Much more often than not.
Yeah.
And I think in the conversation about rock and roll, we've been exhausted by the idea that, oh, you stole this, you stole that. Yeah. But you mentioned, for example, a recent example with Thick.
Blurred Lines.
Blurred Lines. Yeah. And you suggest that he doesn't even know what that song's about.
Well, he said he was drunk when they recorded it and high on like Percocet or something.
So I don't know. You all know that this gentleman had a hit record stealing Marvin Gaye. Got to Give It Up, in fact. Yeah. And so he turned it into something called Blurred Lines, and somebody from the gay estate, which I'm going to put on my door. Sued and successfully challenged and won back lots and lots of money. He said he wasn't aware that he was influenced by any of it, which is, I think that's the historical.
But what's complicated is that Pharrell was the one who actually wrote the music in that song. So
Pharrell dominates, if I may say so, at least the last two chapters. And whether it's he's with, you talk about him being with the Neptunes and penning things, or Pharrell. Yeah. And Pharrell Williams is one of the, I think, I wouldn't say undersung, but he's really chameleonic.
It's true.
You know, he's behind this and this and this and this, and yet you don't actually really see him that much.
No, it's true. The role of the producer is so crucial throughout the history of recorded music.
So when you say mixing, do you mean thieving, or do you mean?
I mean, thieving would be a subcategory and a huge one. Mm-hmm. But there's also, I think there's something reductive about always talking about, appropriation as thieving, because there is also real collaboration, and there is also hybridization. And those things are all intertwined. And
well, let's go through some of them. Madonna.
okay.
Thief or appropriation?
Ooh, we should have like a, I don't know, like a game show thing. Ding! I would say Madonna walk the walk. You know, I feel like she's not a thief because she, in fact, it's funny because somebody the other day asked me if Taylor Swift could take like one example from Madonna, what should it be? And I said, well, the only thing is if she could live her entire life over and start her career coming from Detroit and move into New York City, like coming up in high school, going to gay clubs, mentored by a dance teacher, this Madonna, and then moving to New York and meeting Jelly Bean Benitez and being in a punk band and also going to gay clubs and like being immersed in this totally multivalent scene from the age of like 18, you know? So I think that's who Madonna really is, you know? That's not to say Madonna hasn't made gross missteps in the way she has talked about her right to these stories, but she did live it. She has lived it, I think.
I'm going to call her a thief. I'm not. And part of it, to me, is if you appropriate something from someone, then I think you should make them a part of your product. And particularly, there's a DJ, British DJ Sprinkles, who has a song about how he will only play in a Madonna-free state in a club, particularly because not only did she take Vogue, but there were no black people in it.
Willie Ninja's in that video, though.
Willie Ninja is later in the video, if I'm not mistaken, and I have a problem with her intoning nothing but white people when she says, you know, Marlena Dietrich, blah, 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 blah. And there's no Lena Horne or Josephine Baker.
Oh, you mean the lyrics? In the lyrics,
Yeah.
she doesn't make. I get it, okay.
And even with Willie Ninja being a part of it.
Willie Ninja, of course, one of the dancers who was a great Vogue.
And if you don't know who he is, see Paris is Burning, and it'll be all clear.
Yes.
But which is part of my problem with it. I mean, Paris is Burning is a documentary about queer culture in New York way before Madonna was even born, and something they've been doing, drag balls and doing voguing from there. And I thought she was just slow to to acknowledge, you know. I've always actually thought that Madonna, I think all of them, I think Gaga might be the first person who actually say, these are my people, this is my stuff. I mean, Madonna gives money, she does benefits, and so I've always felt like she's done something for us. But I don't feel like there's any major pop star who's been able to say, these are my people. I get my life from these people. And that's what thieves do. I mean, to me. But
that's very interesting, because one thing I've noticed, especially with women pop stars, as they get a little older, they tend to acknowledge their gay fan base more. Mm-hmm. I don't know, like Winona.
As they get older.
Right. But like, you know, Winona, Janet, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. So that's a valid critique, definitely. But Madonna did do a lot in the 80s around AIDS, HIV/AIDS awareness, and she did, you know, she was very involved. But you just felt she didn't acknowledge the audience.
I think Madonna, for Madonna to be a true revolutionary, she should have come out the bag doing it. You know, I mean, from Jump Street. And you know that she's had, you know, gay dancers, but who doesn't have gay dancers? If you're going to have dancers, you're going to have some queer dancers. And so for me, I was always kind of troubled by it, but it became really clear by the time we got to Britney. Because I didn't see Britney doing anything for us. I didn't see her doing benefits, giving money, standing up, saying, you know, Matthew Shepard, that shouldn't have happened. Madonna did that. And I thought the queer community gave her a pass. But it could be an age thing for me as well. And the cyborg thing that you talk about, that there's something I'm going to say, transhuman about this part of pop history. Yeah. Did you see Valerian, the Luc Besson movie?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
Rihanna, you talk about Rihanna, is in the movie. And I find myself, when she shows up, I thought, well, she can't act. What's she doing? Yeah. Is she a good actress?
She is in that.
Okay.
She plays very well.
I'm sorry?
She plays the part she's supposed to play. Someone who's acting, and she does that very well.
Okay. You hear it from not the peanut.
It's one of my oldest friends. She's no peanut.
No, she's not. She's not. And kudos for having seen the film, actually, because it's a science fiction film and it's kind of come and gone. But Rihanna's appearance in the film is kind of pivotal, without them being explicit as to why she's pivotal. And she's also, she's kind of an omni being. Do I have that part right? Did I see that right? She's kind of an omni being, and she has a song, but the attention isn't on Rihanna as a song. She represents something. And, being an old queen, I'm struggling trying to figure out what she represents.
Well, here's I since I haven't seen that film, I can't necessarily talk about that. But I will ask a question about Britney and her queer fan base, like with the cyborg stuff. Another thing I talk about besides digital native, the generation of digital natives, is the increased presence of plastic surgery and also steroid use. And I wonder if that's a generational difference that causes a younger gay audience to relate that perfection, that physical perfection, which Britney is, she's that perfect body. So I don't know.
And there's some ageism going on, because Britney, will never. One of the problems with Britney, even though she's doing that residency in Vegas, is that she has now entered firmly into nostalgia, and she will never come out. Yeah. I mean, you have to be of between certain ages to even, I think, want to pay all that money to go see Britney in Las Vegas. But you convinced me that she was worth, if not acknowledging, really, again, to me, demystifying. I thank you for that part of it. And that whole chapter, because you segue into that to Beyonce.
The queen. Our queen.
Our queen. We talked about Beyonce, because I had to confess, I used to hate her.
Yeah?
I actually didn't like Beyonce right around the same time I didn't like Britney. And it was like, and then people would come up and say, you're not queer enough. As a DJ, can you gay it up, right?
By playing Beyonce?
By playing Britney, by playing Madonna, by playing Beyonce. And I kept asking not only what makes them gay, but what makes you look at me and think that's going to be my natural go-to.
Right.
Because they're not my natural go-to.
Right.
But I'm stuck with singers. But I used to didn't think that Beyonce could sing.
Well, as we talked about, I mean, Beyonce grew up in front of us. So many, as did Britney, really, and so many stars today. That's the other thing. I don't really talk about this in the book, but we're living in the era of the child star, we're living in an era when children are supposed to excel from birth and be performing basically from childhood on, performing excellence. And I think that's become a huge influence on pop. And we have all these adult pop stars who have been performing since they were like 8 years old. And they were born to perform. And that's a strange distortion of human experience, I think.
So why do you think, given Michael Jackson, that the other can be the norm?
I mean, that this happened, given that we know Michael Jackson, the tragedy of Michael Jackson?
I think we've always known the tragedy of Michael Jackson, not having a childhood and being publicly expressive of, trying to be a human being.
I think you hit it on the head without maybe even meaning to there, because you said not having a childhood. We were raised. We look at this story of Michael Jackson and we think it's tragic he didn't have a childhood. But see, we don't think that way about Britney or Gaga or, well, Gaga started a little later, you know,
Timberlake.
Justin Timberlake or any of these, because that is unfortunately one version of childhood now. Taking classes, being in pageants, doing, you know, excelling, being professionalized from the time you're 6 years old. We no longer think Beyonce didn't have a childhood, and she turns her performing childhood into part of her myth, part of her liberating myth. And as she does with every aspect of her life. I love Beyonce. That's not a diss on her. But this is kind of exciting. I never thought about this before. Maybe that'll be in volume 2.
There's going to be a volume 2. I mean, because there's so many things. I want to give it.
Riz, it's about time we should have people start lining up for Q&A. So maybe that's a
Oh.
good segue. If you wanna- one
We
last-
can't stop. We have to keep talking.
We have to keep talking.
questions and wanna come line up.
So
Wait.
I want to hear you talk while you guys are lining up about the Beyonce Michelle Obama picture this week. Did anybody? Did you all see that picture?
So Michelle Obama published a picture of herself for Beyonce's birthday in the rim hat. I don't know what you call that hat with the braids.
Like a fedora.
Yeah, like kind of that she wears in Lemonade. And, you know, I think that's a fascinating image for so many reasons, but Beyonce's gravitas, you know, her coming into gravitas is so connected with the Obama administration. And, I mean, it's undeniable that the Obama era was the most musical era the White House has ever witnessed. And, you know, there were hip-hop parties at the White House on the regular. You know, Dream Hampton was going and organizing parties in the White House, bringing reunited Tribe Called Quest into the White House. So Beyonce and Jay-Z as a sort of unofficial president and first lady of pop, you know. Their stories are intertwined. But I also think, and I end the book with this, that, you know, I was saying to Riz before, this book, I hope, would have been what it is no matter when I wrote it, but writing it during the era of Black Lives Matter, and, you know, an era when a new civil rights movement has put this history into focus for all of us again, was so important. And it's been thrilling for me to see Beyonce come into her own as a cultural activist, as someone who is not afraid to speak her politics through her music, and connect it so beautifully back to that seedbed of American music and culture that I'm talking about, New Orleans. You know, Formation. You were saying that you were shook by Formation. That was like your change.
That was my change.
With Beyonce, and it's those images and that voice of Big Frida, and, you know, it really does reach back to the foundation of our country, and that's why I believe she's truly important. It's not just the beehive, like controlling our minds.
One quick question. So, what substantial music do you think our White House today can throw out there?
No comment. I don't know.
Thanks, Ann.
Well, we got into it. Thank you, Riz. That was an incredible conversation.
So we have about 10, 15 minutes for audience Q&A.
Great.
I've known each of these people for 35 years.
It's true.
And they're two of the most. There's very few people I know who live music like these people do. I would go to Rebar, and nobody made me dance like that guy. And I knew that it was part of his life, you know? And there's a genuine quality to that makes him special. And there's a genuine quality to her. My God, this woman is incredible.
Oh,
you know? Well, there's PBS, and there's EMP, and there's ANN. I've known her forever, and I wouldn't even listen to her on NPR because I thought, that's kind of selling out, or it's kind of... The same with Rhiannon. People try to say Rhiannon, she's a soul singer. She's not an NPR folkie, you know. But I feel it's about putting your whole life into something.
Well, thank you.
Like, look at this guy, you know? And look at, I mean, it's just something else. Longevity And stick-to-itiveness is what makes a pop artist, and that's what both of these people are.
Oh, thank you so much.
You have to stick with it for years, for 35 years.
Well, I do say that one of the good things about being over 50 is that, like, I can dazzle young kids with, like, I was there when this happened. I saw Mr. Ep in the calculations before Mudhoney. So take that, millennials.
Speaking of which, hi. Thank you both so much for your time here tonight. I really enjoyed your discussion. Just to begin quickly, speaking of Britney Spears, Madonna, and other white artists, or white women artists who have been in the scene, I believe that white queers specifically have given these artists a pass. One demonstration of this was back in 2011 when we had Chris Crocker with the Leave Britney Alone video. There is a definite online culture of white gay and queer communities excusing acts and behaviors from these particular artists. Particularly with Paris is Burning, with Willie Ninja and the other queens and Vogue dancers and those who participated in that culture. I actually visited that film when I was recently at Washington State University, and actually none of those prominent folks who were in the film, and which was directed by a white lesbian filmmaker, none of them are alive today. Right. However, we see the artists profiting off of the garnered arts and culture and lifestyles of those who fought to be present, who fought to be represented, but did not get that. So particularly with Miley Cyrus and her recent kind of graduation and specifically stepping on the Black culture and rap music that she used to catapult herself into the realm of the rebellious white millennial, and now moving onward into a more kind of, what's the term? Yeah,
Country.
more mainstream kind of just strolling along, and that was just a phase. Given the disposability of Black culture, Black bodies, and Black sexuality in music, do you think that we might be seeing more stories such as Willie Ninja's, having those dance moves stolen from that community and being misappropriated? For example, now we have Todrick Hall and Taylor Swift. Yeah. Do you think that this is a trend that will continue as we continue to see artists that are completely missing the civil, the racial dialogue that is occurring, and then continue to profit off and leave these bodies behind?
Well, I mean, I think that's an essential aspect of American history and American culture that we are constantly having to reckon with, and we are constantly having, who is this we? We as a nation, this is like such at the root of our crisis. This is at the root of our crisis. So all I can try to do is shed light on the stories that I feel have been overlooked, and always stress that, as I said before, violation, violence, oppression, and pleasure, liberation, transcendence are always intertwined and hand in hand, and this is what we deal with as Americans. So do I think it's going to continue? Well, it would be interesting if we were having this conversation in 1823 or 1873 or 1927. It's always, all we can do is speak truth to power, as you have. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
Can I quickly say something? One of the most revolutionary aspects of hip hop is the take back to me. Yeah. Is this you say is yours, I'm going to take it back. Yeah. And it's going to be mine. I did a radio show this week, kind of in tribute to Steely Dan, and I did a whole part of it where hip hop artists had taken Steely Dan samples and had made them. Kanye West does it in Champion, De La Soul does it in I Know, and so I think really it's the responsibility, particularly as an artist of color, to take my shit back, publicly, with the voice that I've been given, and I think I'm really looking forward to seeing a lot more of that. I know it's going to happen, so keep hope alive.
And I would also say that artists like Solange and before her, D'Angelo, we were talking about D'Angelo before, really going into the very deepest places and for us, by us can feel exclusionary, but it also is very important and profound to, for artists of color to speak very much from their own family, their own culture, their own neighborhoods. And that's what, I mean, every pop star is compromised. We live in capitalism. Everybody's, Beyonce and Pepsi, we were talking about that before too. Nonetheless, works like A Seat at the Table, Solange's album, or any of D'Angelo's albums, I think, get to that deep place. So I hope that they have the biggest audience possible.
Thank you.
Hi, Roger.
Hi, Ann. How are you?
Good.
So you were talking about the break that rock and roll sometimes takes that darker side. So there's the love and the romance and the sex, that silky sex. And then on the other side, there's that anger and frustration. I got to thinking, just starting your book now, about when that whole thing just broke about 1976, when two underground musics, punk on the one side, that's poor pub music, and then out of New York came disco. And music just broke, and it shattered everybody. I mean, Linda Ronstadt was trying to make a punk album, and Billy Joel did. But why was the backlash so violent against disco? Do you remember the riots and everything?
Racism and
was it
homophobia.
race and homophobia?
Yes.
I mean, was it just that?
Absolutely.
And why do we not see that now? Have we changed? Have we crossed over?
We do see it now, but not necessarily against music. But I mean, back when I worked at EMP, Eric, my husband and I, we curated a disco exhibit, and we looked into some of the history of the disco demolition that happened when they blew up all those records in Chicago. And it was sort of a shocking. It was Chicago.
I thought it was the Detroit Tigers.
I thought it was Comiskey.
White Sox.
Yeah,
Because I was there. I was living in Chicago there. That's how I was.
But I mean, it was like this white riot, basically, and then it just killed the format. But there was, while it's simple to say it was racism and homophobia, and I do believe that's true, I just mentioned capitalism, and I'll mention it again. The music industry came to hate disco. A lot of musicians hated disco because it meant that a lot of touring musicians were out of work because everything was converted to a disco. DJs became the norm. And it was, and everybody's making a 12-inch single, and they're not selling albums anymore. So I think the music industry was happy that disco died in some ways. But, so capitalism always works in league with all these isms, At the same time, I think it's very true, and others have said this, disco didn't really die. It lived on, house music, and then techno, and, dance. You can't stop people from dancing. So it didn't really die. It never really died. And disco was born much earlier than most people know, really 1970, 71 in New York and places like the Loft and the Gallery, DJs mixing records. David Mancuso, who we lost recently, who was the founder of the Loft, this amazing party he had. There's a great book called Love Saves the Day about it, about that scene, the early, very interracial, very New York, classic New York scene in New York at that time. Anyway, so I just think disco will never. You can't kill it. Like I said, you can't kill it. You can't stop the dancing.
And I think we have time for two more brief questions. And you're the first.
Oh, okay. There is another one behind me because I could easily do two or more. Okay. Several years ago, Donna Summer and Whitney Houston died right around the same time. It was and I would be interested in hearing both of you kind of riff a little about those two and influences and club music and so on. And intersections.
You want to take Donna or Whitney? I want to take Donna.
Okay, then I'll take Whitney. One, because Whitney comes from the gospel tradition that was so rich to me when I was growing up. I was going to ask you the first show you went to. The first show I went to in Chicago was at the Regal Theater, and it was The Temptations, it wasn't B.B. King.
Muddy Waters?
No, it wasn't Muddy Waters. It was
Buddy Guy.
in the same old boat. I can't remember the name of it. It was Gladys Knight and the Pips, The Temptations. Pigmeat Markham was the comedian. But I went.
Big B. Markham. He's
Oh,
in
yeah.
my book. I got the River Jordan in my hips.
But I went to see Dionne Warwick.
Oh, yeah.
I was a little boy, and I just had this thing for Dionne. I didn't even know what she was talking about half the time. Message to Michael, I didn't know what she was talking about. But Whitney comes out of that tradition because they're family.
Yeah.
Sissy Houston.
Yeah. Aretha is her godmother.
So for me, until Beyonce, that tradition was just dying to me. Which one, just if nothing else, it means I'm old. But also because it marks the end of human beings actually being able to convey their humanness to each other through song. That's what impressed me so much about your exposition of cyborgs, that now you don't have to be required to sing and to be off mic and sing. And it wasn't until I saw Beyonce sing a song from Purple Rain, The Beautiful Ones, by herself on a stage, on her knees, that I thought, and I told you this, I actually stood up and said, "Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me?" Because she picked her choice of the song, her delivery was just so spot on that it actually, as we queens say, gave me life. And so Whitney, I miss her, but I think that I don't have to worry that thing is being lost.
Right. Donna Summer. So I recently wrote something about Donna Summer for an anthology about women in music that my friend Evelyn McDonald's editing, that'll be out, I think, next year. And I think she is such so the embodiment of the best of the 70s and early 80s. We remember her for her contributions to Eurodisco, but she's so much more as an artist. And if you listen to albums like The Wanderer, like, she's a rocker, she's theatrical, she was like truly a great, and she also had an amazing, she was theater trained, but she had an amazing voice that could do anything. And her eclecticism is forgotten because of those amazing Giorgio Moroder records. They overshadow her larger career. But I hope that people do listen to Donna Summer's albums, because she is like Cyndi Lauper, who also is kind of underrated. I just saw Kinky Boots, by the way. Did it come to Seattle? So good. But these women at that time, like women of new wave, were allowed a lot of freedom to experiment and be eclectic. And I really think Donna belongs in that category. And I hate it when she's just placed in that, like she's just the moan that keeps homes together. Which was actually, what was it, Claire Award? One of the gospel singers was called The Moan That Keeps Homes Together. But she's so much more than that. So go listen to some Donna. Hi, Christopher.
Hey, Ann, how are you? Hey, on your kind of conversation with Mike Pesca earlier this week, you made an interesting point about how pop music is a mirror image to the repression that's going on in society. And yeah, you did. It was a great conversation.
I love Mike Pesca. He's like my idol of doing. He's my idol of pundits. So listen to his podcast, The Gist. So wait, what would I say? I don't remember.
You were talking about how a lot of the sexual expressivity of pop music over the last 100 years has been in response to repression.
Oh yeah. Well, it's sort of a cliche to say music is like a safety valve where we express what we aren't allowed to express in other ways. And you see that's sort of a mythology that's played out like in the movies all the time and everything. But I think it also expresses our anxieties as much as it does our liberation. I don't know if that's what I was saying.
And speaking of anxieties, now that we're 8 months into what seems like a rollback of the last 50 years of gains in civil rights for African Americans and women and LGBTQ, we've talked a lot about the past tonight. What do the two of you see as the future for pop music and how it can lead in this new wave of repression in our society?
Easy final question.
No, I got a quick answer for that. I've been enamored with Afrofuturism, and the idea, Afrofuturism embraces so many things in the past, particularly if you grew up on Sun Ra and Pharoah Sanders, and you grew up on George Clinton and the Mothership.
Yeah, right on.
And you grew up being
LaBelle.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Afrofuturism, many young people here are embracing and installing and creating music around it. I just mentioned Shabazz Palaces. So if you want to start, their latest double CD is awesome. And it speaks to where we're going almost in an internal sense. We're not concerned about the way of the world because we are going to be, we're taking the best parts of futurism, science fiction, futurism, and going forward. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I will take account. I agree with that completely. But a counterpoint to that also, well, two things. One, kudos to the New York Times. They ran a big feature this week about the future of rock as female, talking mostly about DIY Indian punk artists. But that has been an amazing development, I think, that as the music industry has broken down and as technology has become more available to musicians, I think some of the hierarchies within the music industry that sort of restricted who had access to the tools to reach people with their music have, now young people have those tools. And you are hearing amazing work from women like the band The Downtown Boys or Waxahachie or Torres or all these incredible Meredith Graves and Perfect Pussy and these great political, strong young women. It's super exciting. So and Perfume Genius, like queer indie music. Mike Hadrius to me is almost like the Prince now. He's like Prince. Well, he's not Prince because no one's Prince. But I saw Perfume Genius. I almost had like a Prince moment. I was like, this is what I want from music. And I love that those voices are able to express themselves. I think the way the industry has kind of fallen apart has made room for those voices, and I'm excited for that. And then I'll end on just saying, I live in Nashville, and I know all y'all probably think, oh, the South, especially now, but it's such a vibrant place where people are making music together every day, morning, noon, and night, women and men, queer and straight, non-binary, all together, and like people making music in a room. That's what we have, and let's never forget that, because that is the magic that keeps us alive. Whether it's people making music with instruments, a DJ like Riz playing music for us while we dance, or just, singing together, that's the future, and it's, even, I'm an optimist, what can I say? I believe in that.
And powers, Riz Rollins. Good booty. Thank you guys so much.